In this lecture, I will talk to you about the basis of Neo-Phrygian sense. In this video, I will give you an overview of the lecture, and we will go through some review about direct reference theory, which Neo-Phrygian sense can be seen as a reaction to. So here is a quick overview of this overall lecture. So, in the required reading for today, which is Gareth Evans's paper, Understanding Demonstratives, Evans provided a famous response to Perry's criticisms of Phrygian sense. So these criticisms that Perry gave are in the paper that we read last week. So the main part of Evans's paper is a response to Perry's criticisms of Frege. In responding to Perry's challenge or criticisms, Evans developed the Neo-Phrygian way of thinking about meaning. And so in this lecture, I'll be discussing what the basic ideas behind this Neo-Phrygian way of thinking about meaning are. So after doing some review, which will be done in this video, I will then present Evans's response to Perry and Evans's positive proposal for thinking about meaning within a Phrygian framework. So to begin with review. So what is this thing, direct reference theory, that I've been talking a lot about? So note, another name for direct reference theory, which you might see in the literature, is Neo-Russellianism, okay? So there are two more modern views of meaning which are in competition. And these more modern views are direct reference theory, or Neo-Russellianism, and Neo-Phrygianism. So as review, let's look at Neo-Russellianism, or direct reference theory. So direct reference theory is the view that the propositions expressed by sentences or tokens of sentences. So when we looked at Perry's work, we saw that it's not sentence types that have meaning, but rather it's particular uses or tokens of sentences and words. Okay, so that is an important qualification that we must make when we start thinking about context-sensitive language. But in any case, direct reference theory says that the propositions expressed by sentences or tokens of sentences are constructed out of the reference of the parts of those sentences. So the meanings of sentences are constructed out of the reference of the parts of that sentence. Okay, so that is to say that meanings are Russellian propositions. So several lectures back, so in the second lecture on Russell, I discussed what are Russellian propositions, and we're going to review that in one moment. Some examples of Russellian propositions. Okay, so direct reference theory accepts that meanings are composed out of reference. So there's no sense. The meaning of a sentence is built up from the reference of its parts. And that's why that explains the Russellian part of the title Neo-Russellianism. But the reason why this is more than just Russellianism, but Neo-Russellianism, is that, according to direct reference theory, ordinary names, ordinary proper names, and other singular terms, except definite descriptions, contribute a particular object as a referent. Okay, so in lecture 2, when we discussed Russell's own view, Russell thought that most, if not all, ordinary proper names were in fact disguised definite descriptions. So according to Russell's own view, he thought that ordinary proper names did not contribute a particular object as referent to propositions they help express. Whereas on the Neo-Russellian view, the ordinary proper names and most other singular terms in our language do contribute particular reference. And that's what makes direct reference theory a kind of neo-Russellianism, because they accept Russellian propositions and then also accept that ordinary proper names are not shorthand for descriptions in any sense, but directly contribute an object as referent to propositions that the name helps express. So let's work through an example. And again, this should mostly be a review. But I want to make it clear what this view is. So here is the example. I want you to consider these two sentences which we've seen already. So 1a, phosphorus is 5 million years old. Here's another sentence, 2a, Hesperus is 5 million years old. Now in 1b and 2b, I've given you how a direct reference theorist would analyze or treat the meaning or the proposition expressed by these sentences. So the proposition expressed by these sentences is something constructed out of the reference of the parts of the sentence. So starting with 1a, the two relevant parts of the sentence are the ordinary name, phosphorus, and then the predicate is 5 million years old. Now the reference of the predicate is a property. The property of being 5 million years old. Sorry, my cursor isn't working properly, so just ignore that. The referent of the predicate in this sentence is 5 million years old is a property. The property of being 5 million years old, which I have. So in this proposition, which is constructed or a list of its parts, the predicate is 5 million years old contributes to the proposition, this construct of reference. It contributes a property. And the other part of the sentence, phosphorus, the name phosphorus just contributes an object. So this circle here represents the planet itself, Venus. So as a part of this proposition, the name phosphorus simply just contributes a particular object itself that is a referent of that name. The name phosphorus refers to the planet Venus. So in this sentence, phosphorus is 5 billion years old. According to the direct reference theorist, the name just contributes that planet. Okay? So this ordered pair, as mathematicians call it, where we have in these angled brackets, we have these two objects or these two things lined up. We have as the first element of the ordered pair, which represents the Russellian proposition, we have as a first element a particular object, a particular planet, which is a referent of the name phosphorus, and which the name phosphorus contributes. And the second part of this ordered pair is a property, which is the referent of the predicate. So this list, or this construct, or another word for it is an ordered pair, consists of the reference of the parts of the sentence. Now let's consider 2a. Hesperus is 5 million years old. So you should be aware from this example, which we've gone over many times, the name Hesperus is the name for the same planet as the name Phosphorus. So and that planet is Venus. So that means when we consider the sentence Hesperus is 5 million years old, the proposition, the Russellian proposition expressed, according to the direct reference theorist, is the exact same as 1b, because Hesperus is a different name, but it refers to the same thing, this planet Venus. So Hesperus will contribute Venus to the proposition, and we then have the same predicate, is 5 million years old, which contributes the property of being 5 million years old. Okay, so according to the direct reference theorist, or Neo-Russellian, this is an example of what the meanings or the propositions expressed by sentences are. And also it shows that how ordinary proper names, such as phosphorus or Hesperus, contribute objects, their particular objects, to these propositions. Okay, so now let's just quickly review why Frege's puzzle matters with regard to this direct reference theory. So Frege's puzzle then poses a challenge to direct reference theory. If the meanings of 1a and 2a are the same as the direct reference theory says, then what explains how some individual can rationally understand both these sentences but believe one but not believe the other? Okay, so to unpack Frege's puzzle in this case, the ancient Greeks, before they realized that the morning star, or what they called Phosphorus, and the evening star, or what they called Hesperus, before these people realized that it was in fact the same planet, they could understand these sentences. They could understand the sentence Phosphorus is 5 million years old. They could understand the sentence Hesperus is 5 million years old. And without any loss of rationality, they could believe 1a, but not believe 2a. Because they didn't realize that it was actually the same referent. So the challenge that Frege's puzzle poses to direct reference theory is to explain, the challenge is for the view to explain what it is that explains the different cognitive values of these kind of sentences, these pairs of sentences, if not meaning. Okay, so let me rephrase that. Because the meaning of these two sentences are the same, it can't be their meaning that explains the difference in cognitive value. It can't be their meaning that explains how it is that someone can believe one but not believe the other. So therefore the challenge is to show what it is that explains that. Because again, for the direct reference theory, it cannot be meaning that explains that difference in cognitive value, because the meaning is the same, but the cognitive value is different. Okay, so that is a challenge. And last week we looked at two different attempts to answer that challenge. One was from Perry, and one was from Fodor. But now to move on, let me just present to you an argument, or the central argument from Perry's paper. And this central argument of Perry's paper is a defense of direct reference theory, in the sense that it argues that when we consider context-sensitive singular terms, the argument is that there has to be something other than meaning that explains difference in cognitive value. So this central argument of Perry's paper is that even though there's a challenge to the direct reference theorist to show what it is other than meaning that explains the difference in cognitive value in these cases, okay? And Perry himself gives a proposal about the notion of a role for what can explain that. But putting aside Perry's specific proposal for what can explain the difference in cognitive value other than meaning, Perry argues that, in fact, there has to be something other than the meaning that does explain the difference in cognitive value, at least when we consider context-sensitive expressions. Okay, so this argument of Perry's is kind of a defense of direct reference theory because it shows that the challenge that Frege's puzzle poses for direct reference theory has to be able to be met. And the argument purportedly shows that actually revising the notion of meaning to explain the difference in cognitive value is not going to work because it actually has to be something other than meaning that explains the difference in cognitive value, at least when we consider context-sensitive expressions. So let me just quickly give a brief, to finish this video, quickly give a very brief review of his argument so that we can understand how it is that Evans objects to the argument. So the first premise we can say is that the different tokens of the word today uttered on different days have different meanings, okay? So this is just a very intuitive claim that when we use the word today on different days, we're talking about different things. So if I use the word today right now, I'm talking about today, which is July 27th. But if I use the word today tomorrow, I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about July 28th, a different day. So what that means is that different uses or different tokens of the word today as used on different days have different meanings. Now the second core idea is that there's no notion of meaning such that the meanings of different tokens of today both determine the reference, i.e. the different days, and determine cognitive value. So Perry thinks that the different meanings of these tokens just is their different reference. So when I utter the word today, the meaning of that token of the word today is just this day itself, July 27th. And when I utter the word today on July 28th, tomorrow, the meaning of that token is just the referent, i.e. July 28th. So that is to say that Perry thinks that meaning is exhausted by reference, which is to say that the direct reference theory is correct. And furthermore, Perry thinks that there's no notion of meaning that you can give that both determines reference, but also determines cognitive value. Okay? So one proposal Perry considers for what this meaning could be that also determines cognitive value is something like the definite description, the day of this utterance. But, as Perry notes, that description, the day of this utterance, doesn't determine reference. And in fact, this description actually looks like the linguistic role of the word type today. Okay, so this proposed meaning that you might associate with different tokens of the word today doesn't determine the reference. In order for the description, the day of this utterance, to determine a reference, you have to fill in what the day of the utterance is. Okay. And another important part of Perry's argument that there's no notion of meaning for different tokens of today that both determines reference and cognitive value. is that Perry argues that individuals can successfully use the word today without having any identifying information about what the current day is. So actually, understanding this part of Perry's argument is one of the argument analyses for this week that you should be working on this week. Okay, and one thing to note is what you can recall. You can recall Kripke's epistemological arguments against the definite description theory of names. So Kripke, in the reading of his that we read, Kripke argued that we can successfully use proper names without having any identifying descriptions or information about the reference of those names. And similarly, there's an important part of Perry's argument for why you can't find for different tokens of today a different meaning that's not just the reference, but also plays a different cognitive role on different days. Because one is able to use the word today on a particular day to successfully talk about that day, that referent, even if they have no correct information whatsoever about the day. And Perry thinks the fact that individuals can successfully do so means that there can't be a notion of sense, or a notion of meaning that plays a cognitive value, because that notion of meaning that plays a cognitive value has to have a descriptive component to it. Okay? And this is very similar to Kripke's epistemological arguments against the treatment of proper names. Okay. Now, to complete the argument from these two premises 1 and 2, i.e. that different tokens of the word today, as uttered on different days, have different meanings, and premise 2, there's no notion of meaning such that the meanings of different tokens of today both determine a reference and determine a cognitive value. So, as a conclusion, plausibly we should just say that the variable meaning of different tokens of the word today is just their referent. So it's something that determines reference, but is not something that helps determine cognitive role. And what we should say, according to Perry, the thing that helps determine cognitive role is the constant linguistic role or linguistic meaning of the word type. Okay, so again, associated with the word type today is something like provided by this description. So if you look up the word today in the dictionary, it'll say something like a word used to talk about the day on which it's being uttered, for instance. So there's this general rule that is attached to the word type of today. And Perry thinks this kind of general rule, or this constant rule, is a thing that helps explain cognitive value, but this is something different than the meaning of the word on a particular occasion of use. Okay? And the linguistic rule does not determine reference. So it's something different that is the variable meaning, i.e. the reference, and then there's another thing, the constant role of the word type, that helps explain the cognitive value. So Perry's challenge here, on the basis of context sensitivity, is that it should be something other than the meaning of words that helps explain their cognitive value. So therefore, direct reference theory should be correct because it's okay that these two sentences, for instance, have the same meaning, i.e. just their reference, because there should be something different that explains how an individual can understand both and believe one but not the other.